Okay, good morning and welcome to What Can We Do For You? So this is essentially a public evaluation event for No Jobs in the Arts with the wonderful Elizabeth Hawley-Lingham. We're really looking forward to this event. Liz, if you're not aware, is essentially a visual arts specialist who has over 20 years of experience working in the public arts sector. If you've been working or living in the East Midlands with relation to the arts, you've definitely seen her for the past almost 10 years working as the CVAN coordinator. And most recently, she's moved on to Loughborough University. So we're really excited to have this opportunity to kind of have a critical conversation with Liz. Just as you're on mute, Liz.
Well, that's a great start, isn't it? Thank you. That's a lovely introduction. Nice way to start Saturday, to start the weekend. I'm delighted to be here, and I wondered if I might take a moment to say, just to give a little context as to why I'm really pleased to be here, if I might, before we go into the session proper. So I was looking back at my emails last night when I was thinking about doing the session this morning, and I found the very first email that I got from Ryan, which was in October 2019, so about 18 months ago. I got an email from an email address called No Jobs in the Arts, announcing the launch of a zine focusing on showcasing young and emerging artists in the East Midlands, completely out of the blue. No name, just no individual name, just the name of No Jobs in the Arts. And it was an area of work that was closely linked to mine at the Contemporary Visual Arts Network. And so it resonated with me, but also I was really intrigued by the name, No Jobs in the Arts. It was bold and no nonsense, but it was also kind of quite kind of stark and almost kind of raw and very poignant. And it made me think, my goodness, yeah, it's difficult out there. And so I wanted to know more. And so I responded to the email, and since then, on and off, I've been in contact with Charlie and Ryan about No Jobs and about what they're doing and what they hope to achieve. And I've helped where I can with passing on contacts and just being in conversation with the two of them, sometimes over a cup of coffee when we were allowed to do such things, sometimes over virtual platforms. So I was really delighted when Charlie and Ryan asked me to be the co-evaluator for some of No Jobs in the Arts activities this year, along with curator and writer David McLeavy. And as part of the evaluation process, we've designed this session in which Ryan and Charlie are going to kind of put themselves on the spot really and engage in some live evaluation of their activities through discussion and reflection, and in gaining feedback on what they're doing and how they're doing it directly from the audience or some of the audience that they've built so far for No Jobs. So as much as this is an opportunity for them to reflect on what they're doing and learn from it, they're also hoping that it's going to be it sort of opens the learning process for anybody else who's joined us today. Okay, so the format's going to be that I'm going to ask Ryan and Charlie a set of questions about No Jobs, its purpose, and about their aims and ambitions for it, and how well they think they're doing in achieving those things. We're going to consider how they support young practitioners to enter the sector by alleviating barriers, creating links, developing partnerships and practices. It's going to be a conversation between me and Ryan and Charlie, really, but we really want you all to feed into the conversation. We want to be able to capture your thoughts and comments and questions as you're prompted to have those as the conversation goes along, and by capturing those things, we're going to feed that into the evaluation overall for the festival, for the Fringe Festival. So please do enter your thoughts, comments, feelings, questions into the chat as we go along. And I think what we're going to do is kind of gather that all together after the session. And if there are kind of questions that come up, then hopefully there'll be an opportunity for Ryan and Charlie to respond to those after the festival. Okay, So I hope that sounds okay with everybody. Without further ado, I'm going to move on to the questions themselves. And I wanted to first ask Charlie and Ryan about the ambition that No Jobs has for alleviating barriers that are faced by emerging creative practitioners in the East Midlands currently. So Charlie and Ryan, in the context of COVID, but also more generally, just tell us a little bit more about what you think the barriers are.
Yeah, I think when we started, we were sort of basing barriers on what we'd experienced. And obviously through COVID, we're kind of learning that they're completely changing. And that's not something we experienced when we were entering the industry necessarily. Obviously, we're both still emerging artists, but the people sort of really entering now got completely different barriers. I think for us, it's been about working with other people and hearing that feedback to find out what those barriers are. I don't think we've ever felt comfortable sort of pointing them out and saying, this is the barrier, this is what we're going to fix. Again, like opportunities like this are a great time to hear about barriers from our audience, I think.
I agree completely. I suppose if we look back to our previous projects, example of kind of collaborating with other people, we've been kind of encouraged to engage with these barriers. So I know, Charlie, you've got an image of No Jobs in the Arts #4, which was one of our publications. And we worked with Attenborough Arts Centre to specifically work with artists who were emerging and disabled in the East Midlands, and working with curators like Jenny O'Sullivan, who I see is in this chat at the moment. We were kind of invited to engage with a barrier that we hadn't really considered before, or maybe didn't feel kind of qualified to be able to approach. And that's kind of set in its way a new way of working, where we see collaboration as a way to approach topics and approach barriers which we're not aware of as emerging artists ourselves. I suppose when we first set out with No Jobs, one of the kind of the main barriers that we were targeting was the geographic barrier. So that idea of connecting artists across the region, obviously kind of hopping borders in the East Midlands. And one of the things that this kind of digital format does really well is that we've drawn all of these people together from across the country, and that's kind of one of the things that we set out to do.
You've gone viral. That's interesting, isn't it? So about what you mentioned, the geography, because we're these Midlands, which is obviously the focus that you had geographically originally, as you've said. It's a really diverse region, isn't it, geographically? So we've got urban centres, and then lots of rural countryside. And when you think of, I know we've had this conversation before, when you think of a county like Lincolnshire, Lincoln's not even halfway across the county, and surrounded by rural countryside. So it poses a real question as to not only how people kind of get about, but also what access they have. So that's obviously been in your mind. And have you found that, my follow-up question was, how do you feel that No Jobs is helping to alleviate those barriers? So obviously we've you touched on the zine with Attenborough, touched a little bit on the platform has. Tell us a little bit more about that, how that perhaps levels the playing field a little bit.
Sorry, I think I missed part of that. Were you saying about the geographic barriers? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Charlie. Yeah, so it was really just looking a little bit in more detail how you've obviously originally identified some barriers that you perhaps had personally experienced or were personally aware of, but as time is going on, you're also becoming aware of barriers that other people face that might not be so visible or kind of physical. But what have you put in place, would you say, to help combat those barriers, to challenge them?
Yeah, I suppose with kind of working digitally is sort of one of the best ways we can kind of overcome a lot of barriers, because there's so much accessibility you can have online, and obviously geographic kind of alleviates that completely. But I think me and Ryan are both aware that there's probably a lot more that we can do. But I think we're sort of trying our best to work with different people and different groups and different skill sets to try and alleviate those, because we know that that's not something we can do purely by ourselves.
And I suppose we've had valuable feedback as well. I think one of the most wonderful things that came out of number 4, that the zine working with emerging disabled artists in the East Midlands, was one of the artists fed back to us and said that this was kind of all the opportunities they saw and kind of with the situation they were in, that was one of the 4 opportunities that year that they could actually apply for and they could actually deliver. And that kind of having that feedback and suddenly being aware that you could give someone something that gave them like a kind of chance to be creative and that encouragement to be creative was a wonderful feeling.
I think we've also had some feedback as well where it's been like, you could do this and this would be, this would be an improvement on those, this would help alleviate those barriers. So I think as well as sort of having praise and saying, well done, you're doing really well at alleviating these, we also love getting feedback that says, oh, you could improve that. Like, we're open to any sort of feedback because we'll take it all in and learn from it, essentially.
And we're aware as well that the space that we're in right now isn't completely free of barriers. I know we've kind of spoke about the fact that it's helping aid geographic barriers and helping aid barriers relating to disability, etc. However, we've not really approached the economic barriers. The fact that in order to be in this space, that we have to have access to Wi-Fi, we have to have access to a computer, that there's an entire barrier that we're kind of almost erecting in this case.
That's very true.
Yeah, and of course, one thing that the in the visual arts we pride ourselves on is there's a lot of activities that we put on, or content that we present is free for people to access if they can physically get to a space. So yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? And yeah, advantages and disadvantages abound. With whichever context you're looking at, or whichever context you're working in. You've obviously mentioned that you're getting feedback from people, which is really nice. Tell us a little bit more about what evidence you would look for to see what impact what you're doing has had.
I think, yeah, I think we've had conversations about this before and sort of said that it's really hard to quantify without kind of doing a survey or poking people and saying, hey, give us some feedback. Because what we try and do is sort of give people the first steps, and then sort of hope that those links, those connections that we help build will continue. So I suppose it might not be for a long time until we see the benefits of alleviating those barriers for people, which is sort of nice, because people will come back to us months after the project, weeks after, and say, this is happening, we can go back and say we've got another opportunity for you. So it's a nice kind of way to keep in contact with people.
And to kind of events and formats like this as well, I suppose we've never really had an opportunity to talk to our audience. In the past, we've just kind of put things out there. This is the first opportunity we've ever had to kind of create a platform or forum where we're all in the same place. And this is one of the reasons why we were really keen on doing something like this in terms of an event, because we've never really had the opportunity to have a dialogue.
So this puts you in direct, it's a sort of direct interface with people who've been perhaps consuming the zines, or seeing what you've been doing online, Instagram or what have you, or looking at the website, or and of course attending the event so far for the festival. So yeah, great opportunity for you to be on a level playing field with your audience. Okay. I'm going to move on to our next question, if that's okay with you two. And it's about support and promotion that you provide for emerging creative practitioners. And again, I wanted to start a little bit with what is the support and what are those opportunities that you provide? how would you describe them?
Yeah, I think we sort of say that we support emerging creatives, producers, curators in the region. That's sort of kind of what we say on paper. I think when we sort of started out, it was about promotion and things like that. And I think now me and Ryan are both kind of looking towards more like mentoring and providing work experience. We always sort of call it de-risking, I guess, is the word we've kind of used when we're working with emerging creatives. And obviously that, sorry.
No, you carry on, Charlie.
Yeah, I guess it comes in lots of different formats. It depends which project we're working on, what support we can offer through that.
We ended up calling it Mind the Gap experience, noticing that this transition from being an emerging artist to a practicing artist, it's a massive jump, and there's not really anything there for you able to get your foothold. And again, through kind of really lovely opportunities that I've had with kind of working with organisations like UK New Artists, and having that ability to kind of be able to have a place of experimentation. I know if anyone was in the conversation we had with volunteering in the arts, that kind of place to learn and to experiment and to fail, and creating those opportunities that enable that. And we found that we were able to do that through No Jobs in the Arts. And as Charlie said, going from that kind of place of, we just originally started out to showcase people, to show off work. But as the projects have developed, we've become more and more interested in working with people and helping them develop the professional skills and experience that they need to kind of excel in the arts and kind of get access to this field, which is kind of almost impossible to get your head around at the start, and almost kind of be invited in to say that yes, there is a job in the arts for you and you can make that job.
Tell me a little bit more. Did you say de-risking, Charlie?
Yeah, I think it's come up in a few sort of conversations. Oh, sorry. Yeah, the idea that we can provide kind of small scale opportunities that sort of introduce artists into working in the industry in a supportive way. So we're right there kind of helping people with these projects, and then they can sort of take that experience forward and show bigger institutions, organizations, other collaborators that they've worked on these projects before, and they have this kind of base level of experience now, because like Ryan said, it's very hard to kind of get that first sort of level of understanding, I suppose, when you're trying to enter the industry. I mean, like the Fringe Festival, for example, when we sort of went about organising all the talks and workshops, we sort of kind of contacted people and said, we want to do this thing, but we want to do it however you're comfortable with, in whatever way you can make this happen, and work with people's sort of requirements, needs, and their interests, and provide an opportunity that best supports them. And I think that was one of the main things about this sort of de-risking, is saying, you've got an idea and it's good, let's help make this happen.
Giving them a sort of sandpit, or a test, an opportunity to test without blame, or in a sort of safe environment, a safe space.
Yeah, definitely.
And for them to sort of get tools under their belt to bridge that gap a little bit. I like the terminology, mind the gap and de-risking. Yeah, really nice, really nice. And again, I mean, we talked. I'm going to keep coming back to this because I guess that's the sort of reflective part of the process. But it's again about kind of impact and effect. And you talked about slow burn, and I think a lot of this will be. And so I hope this doesn't feel kind of repetitive. But yeah, what's the effect that you'd like?
I think I'll use an example from the Fringe again. We've got our artist talk with Sarah Wolf went live yesterday, along with her artwork that we commissioned. And she's been an artist that we've worked with a few times now, because we discovered her work through an open call for issue 4. She was the cover artist. And sort of that's I guess that is one way to quantify it through the work we've done with her, because we've seen her work develop. So when we first started contacting her, you know, it was a very new project and it was something she was experimenting with. And now she's created this video work and we can still see that develop. And, you know, so I guess we sort of do have, you know, some examples when we've come back to people and continued to work with them, that we can see their works developing through these projects that we've kind of given the opportunity for.
That's only after what, almost 2 years of work. And we're only now feeling comfortable enough to have this conversation and be in this situation, which is a kind of really different way of thinking. And we often talk about this idea of we're drifting into an organization now, and an organizational way of thinking, whereas before we've been creatives and thinking creatively, where you make something and you can reflect on it, and maybe you need a couple of months just to kind of like give yourself a bit of space from the work. But now we're in a completely different field, and it's how do we kind of approach that, and how do we make sure that we're on the right track? And that's why we're kind of really keen to have things like this. And almost, if anyone was in the conversation with Jo Wheeler on social practice, she was kind of describing this need for the kind of the idea and the audience to kind of form together and form off one in each other, and making sure that kind of everything's on the right direction. And that's something we're really keen with No Jobs in the Arts. And I know kind of one of the outputs of the evaluation that we're doing with Liz and David is asking this question: is No Jobs in the Arts viable as an arts organisation? Is it needed? Is it actually doing anything that's useful, or do we call it quits?
Is this when we take the poll? I think it's too early to take the poll yet. I think that's really interesting, though, isn't it? About so what Charlie was saying about going back to, you know, working with Sarah over a period of time, and then obviously the work was shown as part of the festival yesterday. That I guess is about building a relationship, isn't it? A kind of lasting relationship in a way that you're getting a lot of encouragement on the chat, by the way, not to quit, which is just what we want to see. Yeah, building that relationship in a way that you might do, you know, with a friend. I think often things can feel quite transactional, can't they? It's about you know, what can you get, what do you need to give, what do you need to put into something. But actually that idea of keeping on coming back to the same people or the same ideas, you know, intermittently or throughout, you know, a process, really starts to build that feeling of a relationship. And there's no reason why you can't have that with your audience as much as you can have it with an artist that you're working with. So I think that's really interesting to consider when we look outside of this session at the evaluation of the, you know, of the potential of an organisation or a sort of structure that's based on relationships, which I think is a really nice way of looking at it. And that being, well, I suppose to a greater or lesser degree, depending on what the situation is, sort of symbiotic, so that that it's of mutual benefit. I think that's a kind of healthy way of looking at it. Okay. So I'm going to move on to my third question then, if I may, which is about, I mean, we're touching on that there's beginning to be overlap in the questions and the answers to the questions. So hopefully things don't feel too repetitive, but this was about providing developmental opportunities for reflection, and opportunities for practitioners to gain experience as they take their first steps into working in the sector. So you've talked a little bit about what you've already done to enable that to happen. Can you tell us a little bit more about opportunities, for development, but also for practitioners to reflect on what they're doing, given that I think we are in agreement that that's an important part of the process of learning and developing, and also gaining that experience. I suppose you talked a little bit about minding the gap and de-risking, but a little bit more about that, and perhaps then again to go back to the impact or the effect that you would like that to have. I hope that's not too rambly.
No, that was fine. Yeah, I mean, we've sort of talked a lot about the kind of development opportunities we give. I think reflection-wise, again, it started out as a kind of way to promote and provide exposure for artists, but we do an interview series that we've developed, and like I said, when that started, it was just like, oh, how can we best kind of showcase an artist's work? How can we give them space online to showcase that? And then when me and Ryan sit down to look through an artist's work and come up with questions for these artists, again, it started by what's the best question to promote the work they're doing. And now I think we've got quite mean in places of the questions. But we kind of sit down and we're like, we don't just want to ask the questions that best promote the work. We want to ask questions that are going to help the artist reflect. And with sort of, with each project we do now, we're kind of thinking what's the reflective element, because we've sort of looked at kind of like through mentoring projects, when we bring in curators and things as well, we kind of think, okay, can we have an aspect of this that is reflection, rather than just kind of providing opportunities to gain skills and things, you know, what do those skills do for them, and what is their practice now, and how is that going to develop?
I think, yeah, I agree completely. That question that we were originally asking was, yeah, how to best showcase the artist, but now we're in a very much in a position where we're asking, how is it we can actually help develop their career, and how is it we can actually kind of, where is it we can help, and where is it we feel we are qualified to help them, and to kind of share what kind of experience we have, or what experience we have linked with other people, with other curators. Where is it that we can kind of say, we can take you and signpost you to this curator, and maybe facilitate a conversation that would help develop your practice, and kind of keep that ball rolling. I suppose for me, we've been reflecting a lot on our opportunities that we create, and we've ended up calling them frameworks. And we found that working with other emerging artists, it becomes a lot more productive when you have a framework like this festival, and kind of setting out that kind of limitation. You have an hour to produce a workshop. You can do it however you want, but you have to do it within this kind of this confine that was created, and that way we can kind of control the process a little bit more and facilitate it a bit better. And the longer we've been doing it, the kind of better these frameworks get. So the zine, I suppose, is our best framework so far, in a sense that we have these spaces, and then we get artists to kind of either fit within them or kind of reject those boundaries, and kind of see how we can use it as a professional development tool.
I was going to add to that as well with the zine. I think Amber, our guest curator for the next zine, is actually here. But like you say, we built that framework. But what's been really interesting this time is because we're so used to producing this project, we've sort of kind of, in conversation with Amber, tried to build on that, and not, you know, something doesn't feel right in the framework. It's like, okay, how can we change that? Because we know it so well, we can kind of break our own rules, I guess, with that framework. So it's allowed us to look at different themes and different ways of presenting the work, and yeah, bringing out something different through the project, I suppose.
I've had this conversation before. Most people aren't aware, I suppose, but for the last two zines, we've collaborated over almost a 6 month period with another emerging curator. So for issue number 4, Jenny O'Sullivan is also in this chat. We worked with them for quite a long period, and almost developed this project. So kind of encouraging emerging curators to kind of collaborate with emerging artists. And again, we're kind of using this as a way of building on the framework. So a framework which started out as, oh, we're just going to showcase 6 artists, came over and developed into a next issue, which was, oh, we're going to showcase 6 emerging artists, but we're also going to really encourage them to reflect on their practice. Then the next framework built, and it was, we're going to showcase 6 emerging artists, we're going to encourage them to reflect on their practice, and we're also going to encourage them to engage in a dialogue with an emerging curator. And then it keeps getting bigger, and each time we keep adding something more complex and more kind of encouraging more and different interesting ways of collaboration in early career creators.
That's really interesting. So that's a really nice way of kind of charting the kind of growth, you know, in terms of kind of content and scope of what each thing does. But it also really expresses for me, it really expresses a sort of maturity in thinking. Well, a maturity of outlook, both in your thinking, but also in your processes and structures, which are, you know, indicative of I guess, a kind of organisational way of thinking. If you know, given that that's something that's on your minds to look at more through this process. So yeah, so I think the language that you're using is symptomatic of something developing and growing, and being a catalyst for things, whether it's your learning or whether it's that of a practitioner that you're working with, or whether it's No Jobs overall. So yeah, just thinking about the language that you two are using this morning is a bit different from the language that you were using when we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago. And certainly different from you know, the sort of conversations that we've had, you know, over the last sort of 18 months or so. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to get a little bit of an insight into your thought processes, as well as the actual kind of structural processes and the frameworks that you're using and implementing. I think that's really interesting. Okay. Gosh, it's got me sort of my mind kind of thinking of all sorts of things, but I've got these questions that I want to ask you, so I will try and stick to what we agreed. You've talked a little bit about you know, kind of creating links and signposting and working with curators, and a bit about organisations. Tell us a little bit, perhaps taking the Fringe as an example, or maybe one of the zines. What would you say you've learnt so far about building partnerships and developing? Actually, I was going to say developing your working practices, but actually, you've talked very eloquently about that in the answer to the previous question in terms of your frameworks. But anyway, yeah, what would you say you've learnt about building partnerships and developing your working practices through testing new activity and new delivery formats? If I baffled you.
I think I guess like you say, the Fringe is no, it's okay. Yeah, I think we started, like we said, as a kind of very creative mindset, and it was just coming up with these projects, seeing what fitted and who we could work with that sort of fit with that project, I suppose. But like you say, as we're kind of developing this sort of organizational part of Edita, I guess it's kind of not just seeing, you know, project by project, but reflecting on the projects and what we've gained from those partnerships. I think for us, like our partnership with Attenborough Art Centre and Jenny was quite a kind of big stepping stone for us, I guess, because it showed us exactly how much we could learn from working with someone else. It's not just about two organisations working together, so you've got a bigger audience and more skills and stuff. It's just that knowledge that you can give each other, I suppose.
In a similar way to the kind of the example we gave with the framework, in terms of partnerships, I suppose we've kind of kept growing in a kind of iterative sense. As I've said previously in another kind of a conversation we've had during the Fringe, that the way that me and Charlie first started collaborating was just an email. It was a couple of lines of, "Hey, I think what you're doing is really interesting. We should do some projects together." And then that's kind of built on to, oh, we should do the same thing with our emerging creatives. We should invite them to come and join the projects. And it's just kind of kept getting more and more bigger and more interesting. And the more voices we bring in, the better the projects get, and the more creative they get, and the more rewarding they feel. Because I suppose in a weird way, we're just kind of, we want to create a platform which brings emerging and early career creatives together, and it encourages that the theme of the festival, collaboration. It encourages the fact that working together is the way forward. It's how the arts work. You're not really gonna. It's incredibly hard to do anything on your own. And in those moments where you feel like you can't do it, or you don't have the motivation to do it, or you're just feeling a bit down, when you've got a collaboration, or you've got a partnership, or you've got somebody else there to kind of motivate you and remind you that yes, what you're doing is awesome, and yes, you are a fantastic human being, just kind of get over that and get back into it.
Yeah, just get on with it. Stop navel gazing. And something that I've noticed over the months, but also, you know, in what you're saying or expressing, is that you're very open, it seems to me, to new ideas and other people influencing you and shaping the activity, rather than it being, we've started this, we want it to look like this, we want you to do this and you to do this, and at the end of it we'll have this. It seems very much that you are happy to, within your frameworks, you're happy to be influenced and inspired, and are open to suggestions as to how things can be done. And I think that seems to be paying off for you, because as you said, you can see then the growth in each aspect of what you're doing over the period of time that you've been operating over the time that you've been collaborating. So I think that you could sort of chart those things back almost to those interventions or those conversations, those actions that either you've implemented or that have happened to you. So I think that's quite interesting, that kind of openness to it being flexible and adaptable. Would you say? Yeah.
Definitely. Sorry, I think there's a conversation me and you had, Ryan, once, I remember, and I think it was after we'd sort of finished working on the first scene, and we were sat down trying to come up with new ideas, and we had this big long list, and I can remember a couple of them, sort of, you know, posters, newspapers, business cards, kind of very DIY printing based stuff, because that's sort of my background, was in this kind of zines, printmaking, and Ryan's sort of very material based practice. Using those kind of ideas, we were like, okay, what can we do? And then we got the opportunity with Attenborough Arts Centre, and I think, like you say, it was sort of, oh, okay, we can do a lot more when we bring in other people. Not that me and Ryan couldn't come up with something that would hopefully be supportive, and, you know, good for artists and enjoyable for our audiences, but I think we sort of realized that kind of keeping it so like insular, just, it would work for a while, but we don't want to keep doing the same projects over and over again. And when you've only got 2 people, you've got sort of one merged practice. When you've got a whole network, you know, the kind of possibilities are endless to help, I suppose.
Yeah.
More and more over time, I think we've found that our voices have become more quiet throughout No Jobs, almost in the sense that we realised that, yeah, the interesting thing that we bring is creating that framework, is creating that platform, and then the kind of the content, the creativity needs to come from somebody else, because like we say, together it becomes boring very quickly, and the kind of the opportunities in the professional development and the kind of what we're trying to do with de-risking other artists it needs to come from them. I wrote on my kind of note sheet, we cheat. We kind of work with other organizations and other kind of creative partners to kind of make the most of what they've got, and kind of tap into their networks and tap into their resources. So, for example, with the Fringe, we've got this fantastic opportunity to work with UK new artists and use this kind of the resources this international organization has, an ability that they have to kind of put on events like this, which are way beyond the capacity and the ability that we'd ever have as 2 people. And we've had a fantastic opportunity to work with Laura, who has the name heading UK New Artist here, to deliver something that, yeah, is way beyond a scale that we'd ever actually be able to do on our own.
Yeah, I think that's I definitely agree that it's sort of that scale, because when we were thinking about projects we can do, like you say, for 2 people, the scale is only so big. But when you open it up to working with bigger organizations and other collaborators, it, yeah.
It's interesting because actually as another part of this evaluation process, what I want to ask Laura and colleagues in UK New Artists is, what does No Jobs bring to them and their activities? So what value do you add? And I'm absolutely sure there'll be a really interesting response to that. And also, with Attenborough, for example, what has working with New Jobs done for you and your program and your kind of outlook? So I think this will be a really nice kind of complement to some of those questions as well. Okay, I'm conscious of time. So my next question was about, you have talked a bit about creating links and developing partnerships. This was a question about kind of supporting the talent pipeline, a phrase we love, and creating links between creative practitioners and arts organisations and institutions. So not just the signposting, but the actual kind of brokering of that relationship between an independent, an individual practitioner and an organisation or institution. Tell us a little bit more about that and the links there.
Yeah, I think again it's a bit like with the development and the reflection. I think it's so hard to quantify those links because they're connections we hope have continued since they've worked with us. So I suppose it's hard for us to kind of see that happening because we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and you don't know what's happening yet. I know sort of with some of the partners we've worked with, when we've had sort of open calls, we sort of talk about aftercare a lot. So it's sort of what we can help do to keep those networks going. And we encourage the partners we work with as well to think about the aftercare, the artists that we've introduced them to. Hopefully that sort of provides that support, I suppose, for that link and therefore kind of continuing the pipeline, because they go from working with us, like a small, not even an organization yet, to working with these bigger organizations just because of that one sort of introduction.
I think we did a lot of reflecting recently, and we've kind of come to the conclusion that we'd rather work with a kind of a smaller kind of refined group of artists and be able to connect them to more people and kind of plug them into the community better, rather than just going kind of a larger span and just showcasing them and almost being like, yes, we've worked with you, that's it, move on to the next. And that kind of idea of almost moving towards a program of support that really focuses on what people, or what No Jobs in the Arts can do to help develop people's career in the arts. And we don't really want to just be one of those kind of projects that just uses an artist and then leaves them as almost like a dead end. And we're constantly thinking now, how is it that we can use a No Jobs in the Arts project as like the kindling, so it starts something bigger. So it's a fire starter. So then those artists can kind of go off and do other things. I suppose a really good example is the number 4 project, the zine working with Attenborough Arts, because it was used as a way to survey artists in a region. So we looked at the East Midlands. We looked at all the kind of the artists that identified as practicing with disability. We kind of got an open call. We surveyed them. We published 6 of them in a zine. Then that zine went on to be used as a foundation, or is being used as a foundation for a series of commissions, and that's spanning off into maybe 2 or 3 different project directions, and then there's artists to kind of really benefiting from that project.
I love it. There have been some fantastic phrases throughout the session this morning, and fire starter I think has got to be the a big takeaway. I know that we've got maybe a couple of moments more. If anybody's got any final kind of thoughts, comments, questions for Charlie and Ryan that we can look at after the session, please do pop them in the chat now. And I don't know if this is an unfeasible thing to ask you, whether you could say just, you know, in a couple of words, what does success look like for you? Maybe it's too big a question.
I think I sort of had this moment the other day. We were in a meeting with an emerging creative, and I could sort of see, I don't know how to phrase it, sort of how appreciative they were of the support, I guess. And it's sort of those kind of smaller moments, I think, for me, is like when someone just says, this has been a good opportunity, like that sort of is enough success, I suppose, when you know that you've really helped an individual.
Yeah, I agree completely with Charlie, that idea of being in that moment where you've given someone an opportunity to do something for the first time, perhaps, or you've given them the first commission, and being party to that conversation where it's like, yes, we're really, really happy that we can pay you for this. You've been doing it for voluntary for years, and we're able to give you this and say that, yes, you've done an amazing job. We want to pay you to do the thing that you love.
Sort of validation, and it's definitely that sort of sensibility that I associate with you too, and the practice that you've built up for No Jobs. On that note, I think we should wrap up. I think it's a really positive note. It's a really nice point to end on. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the session. I hope it's been useful. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody for coming. And yeah, I think we'll, after the session at some point, we'll be going through the recording and the chat and looking at what we do to build that into the evaluation. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of it.